Pardon for this being such a mess here. Kind of a video about my War Final Assault cabinet and this Arkanoid board. Pretty sure I mentioned in previous videos this War cabinet here. Atari War Final Assault that I bought that was converted to a different game that ran off a PC. Had all the original wiring removed because the game that was in there didn't need any of the actual wiring from the original game. It was all painted black. I stripped the paint off, revealing the art that was underneath, which I happen to really like, so that's why I did that. I've also made a control panel for it. And what I wanted to do with this cabinet is be able to play both JAMMA PCBs, well, any PCB, I guess, as well as there's a PC in it to play games via emulation. So I started with JAMMA harness, just wiring up what I needed to play emulation. I'm using a JPack to interface the arcade controls with the PC. You can get that from Ultimark. I kept adding more and more to the harness to the point now where the only thing that's not on that harness is power. Because obviously if you're running your games through a PC and a JPack, you don't need power, but running real PCBs you do. So the last thing I updated on this was the speaker connections. Again, this cabinet doesn't have any JAMMA wiring in it. So I've got a amplifier, you can see it there, pile amplifier. And I have the stereo output of the PC going into it. Well, I've also now to the right of it, you can see a black box. That is a line level converter. So I have got the speaker output from the JAMMA harness going to the input of that line level adapter, and then it comes out to phono cables. So what I'll be able to do is just take those two phono cables down there that are plugged in. I can unplug those from the PC and plug in the other ones, and it'll pass the sound from an amplified arcade board through the line level converter to get that signal back to line level output, and then it goes into the amplifier and out to the two stereo speakers in the top of the cabinet. So I haven't put it back in yet, but right now I should be able to test this Arkanoid board in the cabinet. I have already, before I took out that JAMMA harness to route the speaker wires, and then I've got some 18 gauge wire on the way for the power wiring, so I think I'll just leave it out for now until I get that wiring in, and then when I put it back in, it'll be pretty much ready to run arcade PCBs, although it's still going to be a pain in the neck to unplug things to go from the PC to an arcade board, but it'll be possible. What I've got here to test this Arkanoid board, I showed before that I've made a harness that goes from JAMMA to this Arkanoid board here. The Arkanoid board also uses a spinner, and it puts out left and right for player 1, left and right for player 2 to the spinner on these wires. And there's also fire buttons for player 1 and 2. So what I did is, because this board has the Japanese ROMs, is a Japanese board, it can do cocktail or upright mode. So if this board was ever to go into a cocktail cabinet that was wired for JAMMA, I have this bit coming off of the adapter that goes to the spinner, player 1, fire button, player 1, down here, spinner for player 2, fire button for player 2. So you can put it in a cocktail cabinet, and these wires should be long enough to route to both of the control panels to hook it up in a cocktail cabinet. So for testing, I have button 1 to both of these. You'll see in Arkanoid cabs they frequently have 2 buttons, and that's simply because some people like to use the spinner with the left hand, some with the right hand. So this way you can play it either way and use your other hand to use the fire button. And I did that because I haven't played Arkanoid since the 80s and don't know which hand I would feel more comfortable with. So I 3D printed this project box, took a couple Japanese buttons I had lying around, and ran the ground and fire buttons wiring to it, and then I've made the proper harness to connect to the spinner and mounted all that in a project box. I did print the bottom of the project box. I could make a hole on either side for the wires to come out to make it neater than this, but basically this was just to see if everything works, which I did test and confirm. Hopefully, after I yank that JAMMA harness out, this thing will still work. Let's go ahead and power on my JAMMA test rig. Okay. Now my JAMMA test rig has a speaker in it now, so if I take this controller that I have wired to my JAMMA control, this button should add coin. And it does. And it also has the start button. And that's pretty loud. Okay. So there you go. Fully working Arkanoid board. I'm playing it with my left hand and holding the cabinet with the right, which is part of why I suck. So there you go. There is a fully working Arkanoid board that can be played in upright cabinet or a cocktail, running on my emulation / PCB capable arcade cabinet with 25-inch standard resolution monitor. With a little box. I haven't decided if I'm going to. I could drill a hole on the control panel and put that paddle in there. The problem with that is I am not a fan of emulation cabinets that have many joysticks, dozens of buttons, spinners, trackballs, everything else. I know that's one of the things you have to decide when you're making an emulation machine. Do you want to play every game in existence? Do you want to play them with the proper controls? Do you want 8-way joysticks, 4-way joysticks, a trackball, a spinner? You know, it's endless. the amount of controls you can have on a panel. Do you want to do multi-panels? Do you want to limit your games? Right now I have this control panel wired up just for a standard 2 joystick, 6 buttons per player, 2 start buttons, and I'm running this monitor in vertical mode, and so I've only got vertical games showing up on the emulator. The monitor can be rotated to horizontal. The only issue with that is it's a 25-inch CRT, and it's a pain in the neck to pull it out and rotate it, so it will most likely stay vertical. So that's choices you have to make when you're dealing with this kind of a setup. So yeah, also I've gone into it in another video where everything on this panel is flush, because what I want to do is get custom artwork that matches the cabinet. Basically, the kind of black and white caution type with green and maybe some rivets and rust, and then there's like fake bullet holes in the cabinet in places. Just something fairly simple like that, and then put plexiglass over the top and call the control panel done. The spinner will be more of a hassle to install, I think, than these joysticks were, because this is a 3/4 MDF panel, and the spinner is really made for a metal control panel. These were as well, but I was able to route the wood to get them to sit flush. So yeah, and I'm still not sure, am I keeping this Arkanoid board to play in this cabinet, or maybe pick up some other cabinet to put it in, play it for a while, and then sell it to help fund this project. I'm not really sure. So the primary concern was making sure that the board works, and also it got me into working on this harness over here so that I can play some of my other, I have a few other arcade PCBs that I could play in this cabinet, and would like to do that without having this test box propped up right in front of the cabinet. Now the reason that's there and propped up is because the cabling that's going to the monitor is fairly short. It just barely reaches. I do have monitor extension cables in my toolbox, which I should have used, but to be honest, I forgot I had them when I hooked this up, because it's been so long since I've used them. So that would have made it a little bit easier, but still I have to figure out where I'm going to put that board. So yeah, whatever. It was just it's a good chance for me to work on things. So the imitation Sega controller that I have wired up, that was a project that I've been meaning to do for quite a while, which got this test box so I could actually start games on it. And then again, like in another video, you can barely see there's like a Space Invaders pattern of holes. There's a speaker behind that. So there's an actual speaker in the box mounted to the box, whereas before I had a speaker just sitting in the box that I would pull out of the box and connect up to a connector for audio. Whereas now it just goes directly into the speaker that's in the box, and it's much smaller, takes up less room, and you can hear it's plenty loud, it sounds fine. So I was a little bit worried with the tiny holes in there that there might not be enough whatever you need enough of enough air travel for the sound waves to get through, I guess, technically. But yeah, it sounds fine, it sounds great. And yeah, so that's about it. And again, that speaker is just part of the text box, even though, like I said, I have wired up speaker wires to the JAMMA harness to go through the amplifier that's in there. I don't have the JAMMA harness back in the game yet because I'm waiting to run some power wires, solder them onto that JAMMA harness, and they'll go. JAMMA harness goes there. There's the J-pack. It takes the controls and sends them to the PC, and the video sends it to the monitor. So the power wires will go down that side of the cabinet, around the coin box area, and then yes, you can see in there is a gray box that is a PC style power supply. It's not your usual JAMMA power supply, which is typically a rectangular unit that you just use screw terminals to attach the wires to. You will see this in JAMMA games, this type of power supply as well, but it came along much later in use. So it actually has, coming out of the bottom, there's a 9-pin connector that's got 3 grounds, 3 5-volt, one 12-volt, one negative 5-volt. Is that right? I'm missing one. I'm missing one and I can't remember what it is. 3 grounds, 3 5-volt, a 12-volt, a negative 5-volt, and I honestly can't remember what the 9th one is, but anyway, doesn't matter. There's a connector on the end of it, Molex connector, so I'm going to route those wires over there on the wall to that power supply, and that's where I'll get the power if I want to put a JAMMA board inside the cabinet. I will then have power for the JAMMA boards, or again, non-JAMMA boards with JAMMA adapters. And the audio will go to the amplifier, so I'll have sound coming out of the cabinet speakers, and it'll all be self-contained inside the cabinet and not this half inside, half outside. So I think that's about all I can say to that right now. Just thought I'd take a video of this up and running before I kind of take some of this apart, put it back to being the emulation PC, just so I can clean up the floor here because I'm making a mess with all this stuff piled all over the place.